Hello, everybody, and welcome to Money and Meaning podcast, where we go beyond the numbers and help you live more and worry less in retirement. My name is Mark Rowlette.
And I'm Damon Tanzi.
We're with South Shore Retirement Services. And Damon, you know, we do a lot of mediums. We have radio shows. We do a lot of public speaking.
Right.
And one of the things, which is the theme of today's show, that we hear all the time is that some of the stuff that we talk about is so beyond the spreadsheet or the portfolio, and it's more on the emotional connection to people's money or the emotional journey that people have as they're going into retirement. So it's something that's not talked about in the industry, but it's something that's so critically important that I think we have to address.
Yeah, we hear it time and again from our clients. You know, I'm nervous about this or I'm worried about this. And I think to try to take the emotion or pretend like it's not there is doing a disservice to people. People are people. And as you often say at our live events, you know, life doesn't happen on a spreadsheet, right? Life is life. And to try to ignore these factors that we know impact people, that we do make emotional decisions. And there are challenging times and events that we face. And that's okay to acknowledge that. We don't want to be driven purely by our emotions, but we want to be able to acknowledge them, but then make the right decisions given that reality.
Yeah, I think it's kind of naive to tell someone don't get emotionally attached to your money because you build it up for 20, 30, 40 years. Right. Of course you're emotionally attached to it. You're also emotionally attached to your life. And when your money becomes the vehicle that is going to give you the paycheck for the rest of your life, the worry starts to set in that, am I doing the right thing? Am I building this out in the right way so I can continue to have the life that I want to have and not have to worry about running out of money?
Right, and you know, this has been a challenging year, right? We've had a lot of market volatility, to say the least. It's a huge amount of change coming out of Washington. Whether you're in favor of that change or not in favor of it, it's a lot for people to digest. And we were meeting with people throughout this, you know, many of our clients, but also new people. And I can think of an example of I met with someone who was not a client, and a couple weeks before our meeting, they had sold all their holdings. You know, market had gone down and they were panicked and they're like, I don't want to lose, 20 or 30 years of work, so I sold everything. And that's driven by fear, right? Which is a normal response. Might not have been the best thing to do, but that's what people are out there thinking about and doing in these times that are, maybe not normal.
Part of what I see is it's driven by fear sometimes, but it's also driven by a lack of knowledge or education as to what are the alternatives, because most people think the only alternative is I'm either in the market or I'm out of the market, right? But there is alternatives around it. I chatted to a client of ours recently. He was really worried about one particular holding that he had, and it was like a legislative worry, right? Tariffs being imposed upon it, and he's like, I think I want to sell everything. Chatted about the impact that was going to have tax-wise, but really understood that he was more worried and concerned, like psychologically about, I built all this up and a year's worth of gains, 2 years worth of gains are evaporating. So it was my job to kind of calm him to a certain degree, but not calming just to get him off the phone. It was more calming him by explaining, all right, if this were to happen, how much of this would you sell? And he said, well, at least half of it. And I said, so why don't we protect the other half of it, like hedge underneath it and build in something that will give you an out, right? If it drops through the floor, we can sell it at a certain price. He didn't really even understand or know that something like that in the world of finance existed. So it was really just the education around it to give him that kind of calming feeling.
Yeah, I mean, people don't know what they don't know, right? We have many nurses who are clients. If I showed up in an emergency room at a hospital and they said, here, do what your client is doing, I have no idea how to do those things. This is what we know. And I think what you were talking about a minute ago is the importance of having a plan, right? And a plan takes into account bad stuff will happen. Yep. But we don't have to panic because we can come back to the plan and say, hey, we modeled out what happens if the market loses 10% of its value. Here's how you're going to be okay, and here's your income, and here's where we're pulling it from. People tend to panic and get emotional when they don't have a plan to come back to and look at and say, hey, here's what we did on purpose, and here's what we're going to do if this happens and that. So you don't have to worry about a new tariff or whatever it is coming out of Washington.
Yeah, and beyond the emotional attachment that people clearly have to their money and the worries that they have are all completely normal. But then you start looking at, because we've been both in this world for a long time, as clients start to age, sometimes their mental capacity starts to slip. And that's another concern if, especially with, we've got loads of couples that one person kind of is in charge of the money, the CEO of the finances, the other one's the CEO of the family.
Right.
And when the financial CEO of a relationship starts to slip, starts to maybe not pick things up as quickly, starts to make decisions that would be outside of the norm of their normal lives, then it starts to become more of a cognitive worry. You want to make sure that, the obvious simple things to us are not the obvious simple things to people that we work with. Making sure that there's legal documentation in place so somebody can pick up the reins if they're needed. And really having a trusted advisor. We talked about this on one of our radio shows recently, where having a trusted advisor, whether it be a friend, a family member, or a financial advisor that is steering the ship and keeping things calm, maybe in rough waters or rough times.
Right. And also being a second pair of eyes or a reality check on, hey, is that a good decision? I want to give $500,000 to my daughter for a wedding, and it's like, wow, what a lovely thing to do, but that's 75% of your net worth. Maybe that's not a great idea to do it. And I know I'm making an extreme example, but as people's cognitive capacity diminishes over time, or if they start to show signs of dementia or other things, it's important to have, I think, a reality check on, hey, let's just take a pause and take a deep breath and look at that decision, or look at what you're saying you want to do, and think about, is that really appropriate, or is there some other way we can do that? Is it, less money in my example that maybe you should spend on the wedding, or whatever the particular example is? But because we're looking at it with a different set of eyes than our clients or people that we meet, we're able to, I think, be that voice of reason and that sort of reality check on certain decisions.
I think that one of the benefits about having a financial advisor, besides the obvious of, this is all we do, and we work with people who are at this particular stage in life at South Shore, is that if you have a family member and they start to slip, and you're seeing them every single day, you don't see the major regression.
The changes over time, right?
Yeah. So when as an advisor, when you see them, every few months, you can see a huge shift in some of these folks, and can kind of be the guardrail, as it were, for the family themselves to be like, listen, he's now doing this, whether it be letting a huge margin call happen or something that is negatively going to impact the family. And quite honestly, if that person who's starting to slip was the CEO of the finances, as we're calling it, the other person might not even realize the damage that could potentially be done to the family's portfolio. So it's our job to kind of step in and say, listen, this is something that shouldn't be done. Here's how we fix this, and here's how we work at it going forward.
And I think that's our job, is not just delivering good news all the time. There's times where we have to have hard conversations with our clients and say things that we wish we didn't have to say, but it's done out of a genuine desire to help them and make sure that their families are okay, because you work for so long and you work so hard and you sacrifice so much. When you get to retirement, you don't want it to be a period of stress, but let's face it, bad things happen. Maybe your son loses his job and he has to move back home with you, or, maybe mom's showing signs of Alzheimer's and you need to, make sure you've got the proper legal documentation in place. There's all kinds of things to think about, and it can be overwhelming, especially if you're going through it for the first time. But we've been through it so many times with so many clients over the years that we can help people step through that process and make sure that they're not missing some big area that they never thought about.
Yeah, and the shared experiences are probably a huge benefit to what we do, by being able to tell people, listen, we've seen a similar situation. It's not exactly the same as yours, but these are some of the potential options that we have, and here's the benefit of them, here's the drawback of the other one. But having that relationship intact and in place prior to that happening is always a win, right? And there's some things that you can absolutely do and put in place, like having legal plans up to date, having a proper power of attorney, understanding that family history of this might happen, and really just getting to a place that you have a team around you that you can trust. So it's not going to stop you being emotionally attached to your money, but it might be able to help you go through retirement, spend your money, and when things like tariffs, when things like market volatility, which will continue to happen,
they'll always
happen, that you understand that, well, this is the importance of why we did what we did. This is the importance of building out the proper strategic financial spending plan, so we can withstand and weather this storm.
Right, and I think that we're stuck in this 24-hour news cycle, and it's very hard because the news is almost overwhelmingly negative. This bad thing is happening, and you're losing money in the stock market, and a little perspective on, okay, but the market may be down 5%, but your account is only down 2% because we have this different arrangement of your money, and you're not all in the stock market, or whatever the specifics are. But not getting caught up in just the onslaught of bad news, end of the world, doomsday. Certainly there's bad things happening, but there's always been and always will be headwinds and challenges. And the importance of having trusted advisors and a plan is that you can come back and say, hey, am I losing my mind or am I okay? Because it's very hard to keep perspective on what's going on in the world. And I think that's our job, is to be that perspective for people when they're not sure what they should be doing.
Yeah, I think, when you look at retirement planning, it's not all just about money, right? Money is important in order to drive the things that you want to do, but it's a huge amount about making decisions, right? Making the right decision at the right time. And that's an overwhelming thing for people who don't do this on a daily basis. So having a team in place, having advisors that you not only trust but are smart enough to be able to look forward and say, all right, this is a really similar situation to 19 other situations I've had in the last 25 years. I think we should do this, and this is why. That takes it off the table, because people don't want to retire just looking at the money and budgeting their way through probably what should be the fun, most fun part of their lives.
Exactly. And, we say this a lot, which is it's never too early to plan, but it's never too late to plan. We'll meet with people in their 80s and they're like, well, I've missed all these opportunities and I should have done this or I should have done that. Okay, that may be true, but there's always new ways to look at what you're doing. There's always ways to make tweaks and changes that can put you and your family in a better position long term. So whether you're on the earlier end of the age spectrum and you think, oh, I've got 10 years left of working, or maybe you're on the farther end of the age spectrum and you say, geez, I might only have a few years left to live. It's never too late to look at what you're doing and see, okay, can I put myself or my family in some stronger position, better position, more secure position, so that if these things happen that we hope don't happen, that I'm protected and I'm taken care of.
Yeah, and the thing that we would suggest people do is stop looking at the money and start thinking about what the money's for. Think about the meaning of the money. And the meaning of the money is you get to spend the time that you want to spend with the people that you want to spend it with, doing the things that you want to do, and not worry about the spreadsheet, not worry about the mathematics of things. That's why advisors should be in existence. That's why we are in existence. And that's why we have this podcast.
So people often ask us, what can I do about this, or what should I be doing? And I think the main thing is to get a second opinion, right? If you have a plan or you think you have a plan, it's probably worth some amount of your time to make sure that that's the best plan. And that could be get a second opinion on your legal work by an attorney. If you have a will and a trust and estate plan, but maybe it's getting out of date or something has changed in your life, right? Get a checkup on that. Or if you have a financial plan or a retirement plan, if that isn't regularly reviewed, as in multiple times a year, it possibly is out of date, or you're missing some key element based on change. So don't let these documents or these plans gather dust in your drawers, right? That's not a plan. A plan is a living document, right? It breathes along with you. So if you're thinking like, what can or should I be doing, take some action, get some help, get someone to put a second pair of eyes on what you've done to make sure that, hey, everything looks great, or geez, you need to change these one or two things, and here's why, and here's how we could help you.
Yeah, nobody thrives on stress, right? So if you could either have your plan being verified by a financial advisor and said you're doing everything that you should be doing and you're on point, that's going to relieve some level of stress on every person. If you're being told by an advisor there's changes that should be made, here's why there should be made.
Right? Yeah.
Here's the positive impact, meaning how much more money or how much more freedom you're going to have. That's also going to reduce the stress levels. And when we talk about, financial plans, I really think that half of it is making people psychologically comfortable with the idea of spending an account that they've accumulated for 30 or 40 years, and allowing them the freedom and permission to spend their money, but feeling comfortable in doing it at the same time.
Which sounds kind of crazy in a way, because people think, well, I'll have no problem spending my money, but we see it time and again that people really struggle to go from paycheck coming in to now money is coming out of my accounts. That's not just a financial change, it's a huge emotional and psychological change, and various changes will happen as you get older. Your health changes, that's a psychological, emotional, and financial impact. So there's all these things that will occur from when you're working all the way through retirement at different stages of your life. And I think having someone on your team, in your corner, so to speak, is a way, to your point, of to enjoy retirement more. And that's really what it's all about.
So what can you do, folks? Please click on the link below, reach out to our office, make that first step, have a phone call with one of our advisors, come over here into the office. There's no cost to having everything analyzed of what you're currently doing. for suggestions to be made of what you could be doing to improve if there's room for improvement. So I would encourage you, please click on the link, come in to see us, and take that first step. Folks, thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Money and Meaning will continue on a weekly basis to give you information that may be beyond the spreadsheet and beyond the money side of things, because we always say in our office, if you can worry less, you get to live more. Thanks so much. Take care. We'll talk again soon.